now going to introduce Charmaine Crowe. Charmaine is a senior advisor at the Australia Council of Social Service, otherwise known as ACOS. She leads the organisation's work across social security policy. Charmaine is directing the campaign currently to increase unemployment and student payments at ACOS, the Raise the Rate campaign. Welcome, Charmaine.
Thank you so much for the invitation to present this afternoon. It's really a fantastic opportunity, and it's been a fantastic discussion so far. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Look, I am going to talk about ACOS's position on the future of our income support system in Australia in this time of crisis. I'm going to speak a little bit about the opportunities that I see before us, and I'll also touch a little bit on conditionality in our system and some options for reform. Now, perhaps somewhat controversially for this discussion, ACOS doesn't actually have a position on universal basic income, but we do have a very clear position that Australia needs to have an income floor under which no one falls, regardless of your circumstances. We're calling for that income floor to be one that prevents poverty. So regardless of whether you were a student, say, renting privately in a share house, or you were a single parent raising 2 kids, your income should be above the poverty line. I think the reason why we've not delved too deeply into developing policy on a universal basic income is because our focus has been and continues to be lifting up the incomes of people with the least. Many people participating in today's event and watching today's event would know that before COVID, the rate of unemployment payment was about $40 a day, well below the poverty line. Students had an income of even less, of $33 a day. And there is a wealth of research to show that no one can survive on such little money. And people were going to great lengths, like not showering regularly to save on electricity and water bills, regularly going without meals. 90% of people that we surveyed said that they would regularly skip meals. So in a wealthy country like Australia, clearly that is an absolutely unacceptable situation. It is unfortunate that it took a pandemic to see the government to act and increase these income support payments. But I must say what has happened, or what has resulted, is the largest increase that we have seen in the history of our income support system. And it's also the first time that unemployment and student payments have seen a real increase, so above inflation, in 26 years. I should note the last time they were increased, they were lifted by $2.95 a week. So that gives you an understanding of how people who are without paid work have been treated in this country. We every day are receiving emails and phone calls from people who have had their payments increased. And I just want to go through some of those because I think they really demonstrate what this actually means for people. I heard from Amanda in Melbourne, who has 2 teenage boys. She was able to replace her broken fridge. And one of the first things she did was go out and buy a trolley full of groceries to fill that fridge. She couldn't remember the last time she was able to do that. I heard from Michelle in Perth, who was able to enroll herself in an allied health course. She's 56 and she wanted to pursue a career that she's passionate about. She's concerned if the government takes away the doubling of the income support payments that have passed, because she may not be able to complete that course. We have heard from several women who have been able to escape violent relationships as a result of the higher rates of payment. So this demonstrates how critical it is to ensure that people's incomes are at least above the poverty line, because when they're not, they trap people in horrible situations that no one should be subjected to. I just want to touch a little bit on some of the research I'd like to see, because I know there's plenty of researchers involved in this afternoon's talk. So here's my plug. There's obviously plenty of research out there showing there are higher rates of poorer health outcomes, poorer education outcomes among people with low incomes. That's really clear. What we don't have so much of is research that shows the causal link between a low income and experiencing poorer health and education outcomes on the other side. And I say this, I think this is important because so often we hear from people who have said, my mental health has declined dramatically since I became unemployed. And it's not only because they don't have a job and want a job, but it's because the low level of income support payments drives them into a situation where they are always anxious, always stressed, and to the point where they can't focus on anything else but trying to get their next meal. Two academics from the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK, Keris Cooper and Kitty Stewart, who sound like characters out of a Wes Anderson film, but they did some excellent research on, basically did a systematic analysis of the research that is out there, and there's not much, but they found that for kids growing up in lower income families, income definitely matters. They were able to show that there's a direct link between low income and poorer education and cognitive development outcomes for kids. So when incomes of the families rose, so did the education outcomes and the cognitive development outcomes, and to a lesser degree, health and behavioural outcomes. So my point is that income matters. And I think if we had a firmer or more solid evidence base to show that, some of our decision makers may be better persuaded to ensure that people aren't living below the poverty line. Now that brings me to the advocacy question. Now, if I'm totally honest, I just can't see the current government saying tomorrow that we should have a universal basic income in Australia. But I am an optimist, and I do think that we are in an excellent position to improve on the government's response to the coronavirus and ensure that we have a fairer system on the other side of this pandemic. We know that there are several members of the current government who do not think that the old system was working for people. Trent Zimmerman recently came out and said he was going to have discussions with the leadership about not returning to the old rates of payment of $40 a day. It's a really positive thing. The other thing to mention is that it's expected that by September, when these payments are due to be cut, there'll be about 1.7 million people who are receiving them. Now, if they were halved, there would be a huge backlash. And not only would it be a tragedy for almost 2 million people in our community to throw them back into a life of poverty, but we'd probably also see, if not a double-dip recession, the economy certainly going backwards at a time when we are already in a bad position. And I think this is why many business peaks, economists and other conservative commentators are urging the government to not go down that road. The other thing to add is that the evidence is very clear that people on receiving those payments are actually the heroes in our economy right now. They are keeping spending at the level that it is because they're buying the basics, largely because they haven't been able to do that before. Finally, I want to touch on conditionality. Now, something that this crisis has very clearly demonstrated was that Australia had gone way too far in terms of the conditions tied to payments. One of the first things that the government did, even before the mass job losses took effect, was to remove a bunch of conditions tied to payments, from waiting periods through to, not allowing any new people that have come into the system go onto the cashless debit card. I think it's very clear that particularly in the last 15 years, mutual obligation has gone too far. Of course, the government suspended mutual obligation requirements during this pandemic. And the question is why? Yes, okay, there are not the jobs that are available that there were beforehand. But I think there's also was a very clear sense that we cannot expect to subject so many people to this very punitive system that well and truly punishes you for being on a low income. And I do hope that COVID-19 sounds the death knell for work for the dole, which is probably one of the biggest failures in public policy that we have seen in recent times. It improves people's chances of getting a job by 2%. So I am hopeful that on the other side of this pandemic, we move away from a system that forces people into doing activities for activity's sake, that punishes people for being unemployed, to a system that actually supports people to get a career that they want, that is more so based on trust than compliance, and that is actually tailored to meet people's needs, so that we don't have this cookie cutter approach to employment services, and that we have a system that actually helps people. Because at the end of the day, I think we all want a system that supports people to build themselves up rather than pushes them down. So I might finish by saying that although I don't think that a UBI is just around the corner, I think we are in a really excellent position to create a fairer system that ensures that every one of us is protected against economic insecurity, and that we have a true safety net for when we need it, and that we have a model that supports all of us to thrive and build the lives that we want. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Charmaine.
Thanks, Charmaine. Thanks for really, getting to the, brass tacks, I guess, of welfare and the policies and the lobbying and the work that's currently being done, and also the effect that, as you've mentioned quite a few times, the current COVID payments have actually really made on people's lives in Australia.